Welcome to our noon edition of Arirang News. Here are the stories making the headlines at this hour. As the doctors' walkout continues, starting today, nurses are now authorized to expand their roles and perform duties normally conducted by doctors. The move comes as the government has decided to allocate about $140 million a month to bridge the doctor shortage. South Korea recorded a current account surplus for the 9th straight month in January. This was largely due to a boost in exports of semiconductors and cars. A Montenegro court has ruled that Terra founder Kwon should be handed over to his home country here in South Korea, reversing the earlier decision to send him to the U.S. This is expected to be a win for Kwon as the punishments for the charges he faces are lower in Korea. We start with a medical disruption that follows the South Korean government's plan to increase the number of medical students. As the doctors' walkout has lasted for about 3 weeks now, nurses are now allowed to perform duties such as CPR that are normally carried out by doctors. Our Shin-Young starts us off.
The government announced additional measures on Thursday to tackle the ongoing shortage of hospital physicians as thousands of junior doctors have continued to refuse to return to work. As part of these, 188 billion Korean won or around $141 million will be allocated monthly in extra spending on healthcare using money from the state health insurance fund.
The government will establish funding to support enhanced coverage of the hospitalization of severely ill patients and provide extra compensation to doctors who care for patients in intensive care units.
This follows the announcement the previous day of $96 million in contingency funding to ensure that emergency care and essential services remain in operation. To further address the disruptions of medical services, the Health Ministry released guidelines on Thursday that will expand the role of nurses. Starting Friday, they will be allowed to perform certain emergency procedures that they have been trained for without the supervision of doctors who would normally order them. Regarding this, the Korean Medical Association voiced opposition to the measure, expressing concerns that it could result in legal malpractice suits from patients who had undergone illegal medical practices at medical sites. During a meeting of the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure headquarters on the same day, the Interior Ministry said it would push for the enactment of a law to ease the burden on doctors and other medical staff facing such medical lawsuits from patients. Meanwhile, according to the Health Ministry, as of 11 a.m. on Wednesday, more than 90% of resident doctors from 100 major hospitals, over 11,000, were still absent from their posts nationwide. Shin-Young, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, President Yoon says soon with a new rail line, the GTX-B, commuters will be able to reach the city of Incheon, where the nation's main international airport is located, from Seoul while listening to just a couple of songs. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
President Yoon has pledged efforts to enhance Incheon City's connectivity with a new rail line, the GTX-B, in 2030 to reduce commute time to and from the capital to just 30 minutes. The president was speaking while in Incheon for a policy discussion with citizens on Thursday on how to develop the seaport and airport city further.
예전에 서울과 인천을 통학하는 학생과 직장인들이 오랜 시간 지하철을 타면서 영어 단어도 외우고 공부도 했는데 이제 그런 공부할 수 있는 시대는 지나갈 것입니다. 노래 한두 곡 들으시면 바로 서울입니다.
He added the city will become better connected, making cities such as Busan in the southeast and Mokpo in the southwest reachable by train in around 2 hours. He also shared his vision of creating landmark attractions in Incheon to utilize its advantage as a gateway to and from Korea. Specifically, he spoke on fully automating Incheon Port's Piers 1 and 2 to create an internationally competitive logistics port. The surrounding land, around 3 square kilometers, will host resorts, shopping malls, and cultural spaces to attract tourists, a project named Incheon Golden Harbor. And President Yoon added that it's important to preserve the characteristics of each region when developing them.
구도심의 그 개발과 복원이라고 하는 것은 단순히 구도심이 너무 낙후되고 노후화됐기 때문에 발전시키자라는 그런 하드웨어적인 측면뿐만이 아니라 그 도시의 역사와 정체성을 살려주는 것이고.
Also, according to the president, Incheon International Airport will become the third global mega hub airport in the world capable of handling 100 million international passengers when its current expansion finishes in October. He also assures citizens that the merger between South Korea's two main airlines, Korean Air and Asiana, will not negatively affect consumers, especially in terms of the mileage system. After the event, to re-emphasize the GTX B line's significance, Yoon joined the groundbreaking ceremony in Songdo.
GTX가 인천의 교통지도는 물론 산업지도, 생활지도, 문화지도까지 혁명적으로 바꿀 것입니다. 저와 우리 정부는 GTX B 건설 과정을 차근차근 꼼꼼하게 살피겠습니다.
President Yoon has in fact been emphasizing the role of intercity connections to increase convenience and productivity across the country. 김도현, Arirang News.
The human rights situation in North Korea worsened further as the regime closed its borders and limited activity in order to strengthen its quarantine measures during the pandemic. That's according to international organization Human Rights Watch in a report on North Korea's border controls published on Thursday. It said the regime began closing its borders in early 2020 and introduced new regulations and stricter law enforcement, which led to a sharp decline in cross-border activities and trade. The restrictions halted on economic activities, which the Watchdog said had the greatest impact on married women, who are responsible for their household's livelihood through market activities. It said the strict border controls violated the human rights of North Korean residents and aggravated their situation. The Foreign Ministry will replace the bureau that deals with the North Korean nuclear issue after years of deadlock in nuclear negotiations with the North. This is a major change after the bureau was first established almost 20 years ago. For the first time in 18 years, the Foreign Ministry has decided to replace the bureau that handles North Korean nuclear issues and create a new department that will oversee not only issues on the Korean Peninsula, but also diplomatic strategy and information, international security, and cyber affairs. Tentatively named the Office of Strategy and Intelligence, it will replace the current Office of Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs. The Foreign Ministry explains that this is to respond flexibly in accordance with geopolitical changes.
This takes into account the evolving reality that issues on the Korean Peninsula are no longer confined to the North's nuclear and missile threats, but have evolved into issues such as cybersecurity and financial sanctions that directly and indirectly impact the North Korean nuclear issue.
This year, the Foreign Ministry also plans to focus on economic security by reducing supply chain risks to prevent situations like the recent shortage of urea. It said it will comprehensively analyze and prepare for changes in the industrial policies of major countries and the possibility of new legislation, such as discussions with the U.S. on the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, which have sparked concerns from South Korean car makers. It also plans to provide diplomatic support to win large contracts in other countries, in fields such as defense, infrastructure, and nuclear power plants. President Yoon was briefed on these plans on Thursday and ordered the Foreign Ministry to implement strategies that focus on nations where government cooperation is important for Korean companies to expand and gain contracts overseas. Also on Thursday, the Overseas Koreans Agency, which was first established in June last year, also announced its plans for this year. It will focus on informing overseas Koreans about Korea's political and economic development. It also seeks to expand support for the operation of Korean language schools and strengthen the capabilities of teachers through training. The agency also aims to help improve the livelihoods of overseas Koreans by holding meetings to address the difficulties they face through various occasions such as overseas visit from the president. On the economic front, South Korea continued the positive trend in its current account balance in January. This is mostly on the back of a strong performance in chips and cars. Our An Sung-jin brings us the latest.
South Korea's current account balance for January saw a surplus for the 9th consecutive month. Preliminary data released by the Bank of Korea on Friday indicated that January's current account saw a surplus of $3.05 billion on the back of strong exports. This is largely attributed to the goods account, which was boosted by a more than 50% jump in semiconductor exports. A recovery in demand for high-performance memory chips and an increase of exports to China led the rise. Automobiles and machinery also performed well, pulling up exports.
Normally in January, the trade balance tends to shrink significantly compared to December as annual export performance records close, but the trend of improving monthly exports still prevails.
Shipments to the U.S., Southeast Asia, and China were all up compared to the year before. Meanwhile, imports fell by nearly 8% as prices for raw materials and capital goods dropped. The services account, which tracks the inflow and outflow of business services, tourism, and transportation, registered a $2.66 billion deficit as the number of outbound travelers increased. The official noted that the positive trend will continue throughout the year.
In the first half of the year, the goods account surplus will continue, and in the second half of the year, the rate of increase of the on-year surplus will become even greater.
An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea's biggest battery and electric vehicle exhibitions kicked off this week, attracting hundreds of global companies to showcase their newest products. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the details on how companies and the government are keeping the industry booming despite setbacks with lower EV sales.
As countries around the world seek ways to reduce their carbon footprint, electric vehicle batteries have emerged as an up-and-coming industry. To help domestic firms maintain traction in this market, the South Korean government pledged to foster research and development for batteries this year.
We will invest more than 500 billion Korean won in R&D over the next 5 years for the development of next-generation batteries, low-end batteries, and eco-friendly technologies.
Last year, the country's battery exports amounted to just under $10 billion. And as a market leader, South Korea showcases the newest battery trends every year.
This year's Interbattery and EV Trend Korea exhibitions are hosting the largest number of companies to date as the market continues to grow.
Nearly 600 firms from both home and abroad were in attendance, including the commonly dubbed K-Trio, LG Energy Solution, Samsung SDI, and SK On. According to SNE research, their combined market share came to just over 20% in January this year, with all three recording year-on-year growth. But with Chinese battery firms beginning to take bigger portions of the pie, South Korean companies are upping their game. LG Energy Solution showcased mid-nickel NCM batteries that have a reduced proportion of nickel.
Nickel is a rare resource, so reducing the amount of nickel that's used helps to lower costs.
Other than lowering costs to match their cheaper counterparts, firms are also diversifying their portfolios. Samsung SDI plans to start mass production of their all-solid battery, which boasts a longer lifespan and endurance in 2027, leading to safer EVs with longer running times. SK On has jumped into the lithium iron phosphate battery market, with LFP batteries having a high power density that makes them ideal for EVs.
LFP batteries don't typically perform as well in low temperatures, but our new Winter Pro LFP battery has improved on those weaknesses.
Despite lagging global EV sales, companies are finding ways to keep the momentum going. With commercialization of these advanced technologies yet to hit the market, there's still much room for growth. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
The European Central Bank held its interest rates steady for a fourth meeting as policymakers hinted at a cut in interest rates this June. The interest rate was kept at 4.5%, and the central bank for the 20 Eurozone countries also revised its inflation forecast on Thursday. Their latest projection puts inflation at 2.3% this year, down from 2.7% forecast in December, as they expect energy prices to stabilize and lower consumer prices. Growth outlook was also revised downward by 0.2 percentage points. The Federal Reserve Chair Chair Powell once again hinted that potential interest rate cuts are on their way, saying the confidence needed for lowering interest rates is not far. Our Shin Se-byuk has this report.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell once again signaled the possibility of interest rate cuts within 2024, noting that the Fed is, quote, not far from the confidence needed to ease rates. Speaking at the Senate Banking Committee on Thursday, Powell outlined that the Federal Reserve is poised to gradually lift its restrictive policies once it is assured that inflation is steadily declining towards its 2% target. He underscored that this confidence is within reach. Powell's remarks came only a day after his testimony before Congress, where he presented a similar outlook on rate reductions. However, in his latest statements, he hinted more strongly that the moment to act on such confidence is nearing. Despite this, Powell maintained a cautious approach regarding a specific timeline, underscoring that the fight against inflation continues. He stressed the need for further progress in achieving the Fed's inflation objectives before any policy adjustments are made. In January, the U.S. Consumer Price Index rose 3.1% on year, falling short of the Federal Reserve's target. Powell's statements have injected a dose of optimism among investors anticipating future rate cuts. This optimism was mirrored in the stock market's performance, with the S&P 500 achieving a new record high at Thursday's close on the New York Stock Exchange. The S&P 500 index rose 1.03% to 5,157.36.
So the sentiment today is mostly Powell's testimony before Congress, both yesterday and then the Senate today.
The Dow Jones also experienced growth, up 0.34%, while the Nasdaq Composite jumped by 1.51%. Looking ahead, the Federal Open Market Committee is scheduled to meet on March 19th and 20th, where a detailed policy statement and an update on the interest rate outlook is expected. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
A high court in Montenegro has overturned an earlier ruling that said disgraced co-founder of Terraform Labs Kwon should be extradited to the U.S. Instead, Kwon will be heading home to South Korea to face fraud charges. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
Last month, the Podgorica High Court in Montenegro ruled that disgraced crypto entrepreneur and co-founder of Terraform Labs should be extradited to the United States to face fraud charges. However, on Tuesday, an appeals court accepted Kwon's appeal and invalidated the U.S. extradition, ordering a retrial. According to Montenegrin daily newspaper Vijesti on Thursday, the same court that ruled on extradition to the U.S. reversed its decision and ruled that Kwon should be extradited to South Korea. The latest ruling is said to be based on the request letters received from both the U.S. and South Korea. According to the appeals court, the official letter requesting extradition to the U.S. arrived on March 27th last year, while the request from South Korea arrived the following day. While the U.S. request arrived earlier, the issue lies on the fact that the U.S. document only contained a request for a temporary detention of Kwon and not an actual extradition. The court ruled that the High Court violated the Criminal Procedure Act, calling for the retrial. The reversal is a major victory for Kwon, who wants to be extradited to his home country. An extradition to the U.S. would have meant a much longer prison sentence for his fraud charges, compared to the sentence he would likely receive in South Korea. According to the head of public relations at the Podgorica High Court, barring an appeal by the High Prosecutor's Office, Kwon should be extradited to South Korea at the earliest within the next few days. However, Kwon's attorney, speaking to online cryptocurrency media outlet CoinDesk, said Kwon will finish serving his sentence on March 23rd and will be extradited after that. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Global streaming service Spotify announced that girl group BLACKPINK was the most streamed South Korean female group, or artists on its platform last year. According to data released on Thursday, South Korean female groups or artists were streamed over 24 billion times globally in 2023, which is a more than 600% increase compared to 2018. New Jeans, Twice, The Seraphim, and 50/50 follow BLACKPINK as the next most streamed groups. Spotify said it released a list to celebrate International Women's Day on Friday, March 8th.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. Starting in Ukraine, British Defense Secretary Grant Shapps arrived in Kyiv on Thursday and met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. They discussed the ongoing war in Ukraine and ways in which the UK can continue to provide defense cooperation to Kyiv. President Zelensky shared a social media post of the meeting highlighting the importance of continued collaboration between the two states. During the meeting, Shapps announced that the UK will increase its spending on Ukraine, providing an extra $160 million to purchase 10,000 drones. The announcement follows an initial $256 million drone package that was unveiled in January during the visit of British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to Kyiv. At a critical time in the two-year conflict, London's support for Kyiv is crucial as U.S. military aid has stalled. Sweden officially became NATO's 32nd member on Thursday, depositing its instrument of accession to the North Atlantic Treaty with the government of the United States in Washington, D.C. This was the final procedure to fulfill the conditions for the country's entry into the defense alliance. Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson delivered the final documents, referring to the day as truly historic and a victory for freedom. During the ceremony, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the moment was historic for Sweden and the transatlantic alliance. Prime Minister Kristersson said Sweden will live up to high expectations from all NATO members, sharing burdens, responsibilities, and risks, and make unity and solidarity the guiding light. Through a statement, U.S. President Joe Biden also welcomed Sweden's accession. Also on Thursday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen won the backing of the European Union's leading political group, the center-right European People's Party, as they voted to endorse the incumbent president as its candidate for a second term. Von der Leyen, who was the only candidate on the party's ballot, identified conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza and the increasing power of China as the most crucial challenges for the European Union. After receiving a standing ovation, von der Leyen promised to strengthen the EU's economies, resolve immigration issues, and improve competitiveness. Voting to select a leader of the EU will take place in June. In Argentine Patagonia, archaeologists have unearthed the earliest dated cave paintings in South America, dating back 8,200 years. Archaeologists from Argentina and Chile discovered 895 paintings in the Hunal 1 cave in Yukon province. According to an expert, the discovery indicates that the production of cave art began approximately 8,000 years ago, with the specific pattern persisting for at least 3,000 years. The discovery is also evidence of the artistic ability of the hunter-gatherer societies and a way of communication between scattered populations. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Yesterday's wet conditions brought spring cold to much of country. Morning temperatures were nearly 4 degrees lower than yesterday here in Seoul, but sharp winds made things colder. Highs will also be a couple of notches lower this afternoon, but finally seeing some full sunshine in most places. Daily highs are similar to a tad lower this afternoon, hovering around 10 degrees in southern parts of the country. Busan topping out at 11 degrees. Gwangju, Jeju at just 9 degrees. Meanwhile, bad air quality in western regions should improve this afternoon. As for this weekend, morning temperatures go down to -3 degrees in Seoul, but biting winds will make things colder. Those planning on a short getaway this weekend need to take the weather into account and do dress accordingly. Then rain is in the forecast for the start of next week, but it should become more stable and promising as we head into the end of the week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for you at this hour. We'll bring you more updates at the same time on Monday.